Hello, my dear students. How are you? I hope you all are good. Students, today welcome in class 8 English, lesson 3, The Man in the Train. Student, the lesson The Man in the Train is written by E. Frank Candlin. Student, before starting the lesson, I want to ask some questions here. Do you like reading suspense and detective stories? Have you ever read or heard of thrillers? There are different kinds of thrillers in the world of literature, such as thrillers, psychological thrillers, etc. And we all love the story of Little Red Riding Hood, which is one of the earliest examples of the psychological thrillers. You may also read the classic thriller The Count of Monte Cristo, written by Alexander Dumas, the French author. So, student, now this story, The Man in the Train, is a beautiful example of detective story and suspense story we are going to read now. Now, students, whenever we read about a crime in the newspaper or watch a suspense movie, our thought and emotions get disturbed. There are lots of emotions and thoughts came in our mind and we became very disturbed. But what we see in the movie is all make believe and not real. And sometimes what we have read in the newspaper turns out to be false. When this realization dawns upon us, we feel relieved and our minds are free from the tension once again. So, student, read this story to see how unfounded fear and suspense can prey upon a person's mind. And who was the person here? Mrs. Black, who is the main character of the story. Now, let's begin. Mrs. Black saw him first on the platform at Victoria Station. Here, student, Mrs. Black, she was going to visit some cousins in Eastbourne, and at present she was at the Victoria Station. And she saw a tall, heavy man with dark hair carrying a case and a light overcoat over his arm. Now she asked her husband, "Do we know that man?" who was seeing her off at the station for a day visit to some cousin in Eastbourne. Now, her husband was seeing her off at the station because she was going for a day's visit to some cousins in Eastbourne. Now she told, "I am sure I have seen him somewhere before." Now she told here that I am sure I have seen him somewhere before. But what is the reply of Mr. Black? Mr. Black shook his head in no. "I have never seen him in my life," he said. "Now have you got everything you watched? You wanted a newspaper." Now Mr. Black replied that "I have never seen him in my life," he said. And now he asked to Mrs. Black that "Have you got everything you wanted? A newspaper or anything else?" "No thanks, I have read the paper this morning." Mrs. Black refused for the newspaper because she had already read the newspaper this morning. "But please get me a magazine and some water." What she demanded here? She demanded a magazine and some water. Mr. Black bought his wife's ticket at the booking office and then found her a seat in an empty first class carriage. Student, here Mr. Black bought his wife's ticket from where? At the booking office, and then he found a seat also where in an empty first class carriage. And now he said I'm sorry I can't stay until the train goes, because he was busy and he has to leave for the office now, and that's why he told that I am sorry I can't stay until the train goes. I have to leave for the office now. Now Mrs. Black waved goodbye to her husband and then sat down in a corner to read the magazine. Mrs. Black said goodbye to her husband and then she sat down in a corner of the empty carriage and she started reading the magazine. Then just as the train was going to start, a tall, dark man got in, and he was the same person who was at the station, at the platform. He put his overcoat and case on the luggage rack above his head and sat down in the seat facing her. As soon as the train started, he took out a newspaper and began to read. Now, what happened here, student? As the train started moving, suddenly a man, which man? A tall, dark man who was at the platform, got in the train and he put his overcoat and the case, means suitcase or anything else, luggage, where on the luggage rack, and after that he started reading a newspaper. Mrs. Black looked at him. She was sure she knew him. Now, even now, she was thinking about that person only and she was sure here that she knew him. Then suddenly she remembered in the newspaper that morning some pictures on the front page, and among them the picture of a man whom the police were looking for. The man the police said was a killer. Now, what will be the condition of Mrs. Black after remembering these things? According to the newspaper, the man who was sitting before her was a killer. Now, the man was sitting there with her in an empty compartment of a train and traveling at 60 miles an hour. What is the speed of the train? 60 miles an hour. A train that did not stop for over an hour until it goes to Eastbourne. Now, student, there is no stoppage between Victoria Station and Eastbourne Station, and the train is traveling at 60 miles an hour. Now you can imagine here that what will be the condition of Mrs. Black. She was thinking that I am sitting with a killer. You can see in the picture, student, that how they were sitting and there is one knife in the hand of the man. Mrs. Black was frightened, very frightened. What ought she to do? Pull the alarm cord above her head and stop the train. Now she was very frightened, very frightened, and she was thinking that what should she to do? She was thinking about to pull the alarm cord and stop the train. But what shall she say to the guard when he comes? She was thinking that if the guard comes, then what she will tell. She asked herself, I can't be sure this is the man. If it is the man in the picture, what will he do if I get up to pull the cord? Now she was very afraid. She was thinking that suppose that if the person is the real killer, so what will he do if she gets up to pull the cord? The man was still reading his newspaper and Mrs. Black went on watching him over her magazine. She was reading the magazine, covering her face with the magazine and staring at the man. If only I had that newspaper John wanted to buy me, she thought, I could have a look at the picture again and be sure. Now, students, she wanted to be sure by seeing the picture again, but unfortunately, she doesn't have the newspaper. After some time, the man put down his paper and looked out of the window. As she watched him, Mrs. Black became certain that he was the man in the picture. A killer who always uses a knife, the paper had said. Then she remembered something else from the newspaper story. something about a woman killed by this man in a train. Now, student, what happened here? After some time, the man put down his paper and looked out of the window, and then she watched him very carefully, and then she was sure here that he was the man in the picture in the newspaper. And who was the man? The man was a killer and who always uses a knife according to the newspaper. Then she remembered something else from the newspaper story, that the man killed a woman in the train. Suddenly she sat up. The man's hand was moving toward the pocket of his coat. Slowly he put his hand into his pocket and took out a knife. Carefully he opened the blade. A long blade pointed at the end. Now suddenly Mrs. Black sat up and the man's hand was moving toward the pocket. For what? For taking out a knife. He took out a knife and very carefully he opened the blade. And how was the blade? It was a sharp blade. It was a long blade pointed at the end. Now you can imagine, student, that what will be the condition of Mrs. Black. She was very scared and she was thinking. There are lots of emotions and thoughts coming in the mind of Mrs. Black. Mrs. Black wanted to jump to her feet and screamed for help, but she could not move. Why she could not move? Due to fear. Fear held her, means fear stopped her. Only her eyes watched the open knife in the man's hand. Now his other hand began to move toward his pocket. Now what happened, student? When she saw the pointed end of the knife, she wanted to jump to her feet but and screamed for help, but due to fear she can't do. Only her eyes watched the open knife in the man's hand who was sitting before her, and now the other hand moved toward his pocket. He is looking for a handkerchief to put over his mouth so that no one will hear me, she thought. Now she was thinking that the man was searching what? A handkerchief to cover my face. But instead, he took out an apple. The man took out an apple and began to peel it slowly, putting the peel carefully into a paper bag, and he also took out from his pocket. Now what he has done, student? He took out an apple and began to peel it slowly, and then after he kept the peel into a paper bag. Now Mrs. Black breathed more easily. Perhaps he was not the killer after all. Now she was thinking here, Mrs. Black was thinking that he was not the killer after all, because he took out an apple, not the handkerchief. But no, she looked again at his face. She was quite sure now that was the face in the newspaper picture. And what happened, student, now? She looked again at the face of the man. And now she was quite sure that the man was the same man in the newspaper picture. Then he did something which brought back all her fears. He finished peeling his apple, and instead of putting the knife back into his pocket, he put it down, still open, on the sheet beside him. Then he did something which brought back all her fear. Now again she became very fearful, because after finishing peeling the apple, the man has not kept the knife. The knife was still open and it was kept beside him. And that's why Mrs. Black was very fearful. She lifted her magazine, for now he was watching her, his deep dark eyes never moving. Now her condition was very pitiable, and He was watching her, his deep dark eyes never moving. Now thought Mrs. Black, nearly dead with fear. Now he is going to kill me. But the man opened the window, threw out the paper bag with the apple peel, closed the window, and sat down again. Now, student, Mrs. Black thought that now she was nearly dead with fear. She was very afraid and she was thinking that now he is going to kill me. But the man opened the window and threw out the paper bag with the apple peel, and after that closed the window and sat down again. Over the top of her magazine, she saw the man's right hand move toward the open knife on the sheet beside him. At that moment, the train began to slow down. Mrs. Black saw the houses and the street of Eastbourne moving past the window. Then the train stopped and the man stood up. Now she was watching the man with the right hand move toward the open knife on the sheet beside him. At that moment, the train began to slow down, and Mrs. Black saw the house and the street of Eastbourne. It means that the station came and the train stopped and the man stood up. Yes, she was right. He was the killer, because outside the platform watching for him were two policemen. There were two policemen at the platform and they were waiting for the killer. As he got down from the train, both the policemen saluted smartly. But here, what happened? As he got down from the train, who got down from the train? The man, the killer. According to Mrs. Black, the killer got down from the train. But both the policemen saluted smartly and wished, "Good morning, Inspector," one of them said. "The chief constable is waiting for you at the police station. Sir, we have a car outside." Now one of the policemen told that the chief constable is waiting for you at the police station and we have a car outside. As they walked away down the platform, Mrs. Black picked up the newspaper which was still on the seat. On front page were two pictures, one of the small man with thin lips and another of a big dark man she now knew so well. Now student, suddenly she took out the newspaper, and then on the front page there were two pictures, one of a man with thin lip and another of a big dark man she now knew so well, because that person, that another big dark man was sitting with her for the last 1 hour. Under the first were the words Jack the Killer. Under one picture, student, what is written? Jack the Killer, and under the other, Inspector Thornton of Scotland Yard in charge of the case. So who was the person sitting with her? He was an inspector of inspector, and what is the name of the inspector? Thornton, and who was from Scotland Yard and who was in charge of the case. Now she was sure and she was very now she was not afraid. She was very much cool now and relaxed too. Mrs. Black smiled as she got down into a taxi, and John always says, he was thinking here that John always says, "I don't read the newspaper carefully enough." Now she was thinking here that John, who was John here? John is Mr. Black, and he or says, "I don't read the newspaper very carefully enough." And who? Mrs. Black. Who is I here? Mrs. Black. She doesn't read the newspaper carefully enough according to Mr. Black. She was thinking here. Now she was relaxed. So student, in the story here we have read the mental condition of Mrs. Black, the suspense and emotions, the thoughts that came in her mind during the journey. So it's a very interesting story of suspense, and it's written by E. Frank Candlin. So I hope that you enjoyed the story very much. Thank you for watching the video.